So I want you to imagine stepping into this vast, silent, windswept wilderness. We're talking about the Gobi Desert.
In southeastern Mongolia, yeah.
A place that's just defined by these extreme seasons, rocky uplands, and this long, long history of nomadic communities.
Right, for millennia.
Now, picture finding two pieces of, well, foreign trash.
Mm-hmm.
Two tiny, glittering fragments of pottery just sitting there on the ground.
And they just pop, they're bright, they're sophisticated, and, instantly they do not belong there. They're from thousands of miles away.
That mismatch, the huge scale of the Gobi and these two tiny little sherds of ceramic,
Yeah.
that's the mystery we're getting into today.
It is. Our whole mission here is to unpack a really fascinating study. It's from the Journal of Archaeological Science, Reports by Dr. Ellery Fromm and his colleagues.
And they didn't just find them, they chemically identified them.
Mm-hmm. And the conclusion is, frankly, shocking.
It's that these two glazed ceramic sherds, one is a light blue-green, the other a darker grayish-green. They originated deep inside the Persian Empire.
Probably during the early Islamic period.
And that just fundamentally changes how we understand the reach and even the daily reality of ancient global trade.
It does. I mean, when we talk about the Silk Road, we usually think of empires, of bigwigs communicating.
Right, kings and courts.
Exactly. These two little fragments suggest that even the herders in these remote seasonal camps were sort of plugged into a global supply chain, stretching all the way from Central Asia to the Middle East.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we really need to start with the sheer physical challenge of this discovery.
The context is everything here.
So let's anchor ourselves. The discovery was made by the Dornod Mongol Survey, the DMS, back in 2016.
Right.
They were combing the Delgerkhaan Uul Hills region. And when we say combing, I mean the full DMS study area is a staggering 7,000 square kilometers.
It's enormous. It's larger than some small countries.
That's just a huge piece of landscape.
It is. And the goal for the DMS isn't just, finding glittering treasures. They're looking at long-term organizational change among these mobile Gobi communities.
So how they lived, how they moved around.
Yeah, how they organized themselves over thousands of years, from the early Bronze Age right through the medieval period.
And the key thing for us, I think, is where exactly these Persian bits turned up. They were surveying a smaller 200 square kilometer area within that massive zone. And the sherds were found during just routine pedestrian surveys of two really small temporary sites.
And that's the crucial detail. These were not major cities. They weren't administrative centers. They certainly weren't the Mongol imperial capital of Karakoram. These were small seasonal herding sites, DMS 476 and DMS 647.
Okay, so tell me about DMS 476. What was that like?
Site 476 was basically a scatter of material, mostly from the medieval Khitan Liao and Mongol period. So you're looking at roughly the 10th to 13th centuries CE.
And the other site, 647, that one was even more remote, wasn't it?
Yes, about 8 kilometers away. And it had this really diverse mix of stuff, including stone tools that suggest a much, much earlier occupation, maybe even Neolithic. So the glazeware found there was probably, curated or just washed out of other nearby medieval sites. The point is, these are peripheral camps, temporary spots used by mobile herders for maybe a few months a year.
Which is just so counterintuitive. If you're a historian, you'd assume a high-value Persian import, if it made it to the Gobi, would end up with the elite.
Right, in a palace or a big city.
Finding it here just doesn't fit the old model.
Exactly. But that remote context created an immediate problem for the researchers.
What was that?
Well, the sherds were tiny, literally just these two small pieces. So all the traditional ways of identifying pottery were impossible.
You couldn't tell what the original pot looked like.
Not at all. Couldn't tell if it was from a massive storage jar or a tiny little bowl. The usual things we look for: decorative style, vessel size, black pigment patterns. They just weren't there.
So given that, how on earth did they figure out where they came from? I mean, why should we trust the story of two tiny, maybe random fragments?
That is where the high-tech archaeology comes in. The only way to solve it was to ignore the form and focus completely on the material itself.
On the technological composition of the glaze.
Precisely. They shipped these little fragments off to Yale University Archaeological Laboratories.
And what were they looking for exactly?
They needed a chemical fingerprint, one strong enough to tell the difference between the two dominant medieval glaze traditions of the East, Chinese and Persian.
Okay, so how do you get a fingerprint like that?
They used two key methods. First, portable X-ray fluorescence, or XRF analysis.
Right.
That gives you a quick, non-destructive read of the bulk elemental composition of the glaze. And second, they used electron microscopy, SM, with energy dispersive X-ray spectrometry, EDS.
Why use both? Doesn't the XRF tell you what's in there?
It does, but the SEM with EDS it's more precise. It's critical for surface mapping and microanalysis. It lets you look at the microstructure and get elemental analysis from tiny, specific spots.
Like little impurities or something.
Exactly. Contaminants, inclusions. It's vital for really differentiating source materials. They were trying to build a case that could stand up to centuries of accepted history.
And to do that, you have to compare it against a rock-solid baseline, I assume.
Absolutely. They benchmarked the Gobi fragments against two really rigorous data sets. First, a collection of known Persian sherds from major production sites like Kashan and Sultania.
So, confirmed examples.
Right. And second, a massive literature data set. They compared the chemical boundaries of 212 known Chinese glaze compositions against 209 known early Islamic and Middle Eastern ones. They essentially drew a chemical line in the sand.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They ran the numbers, and the verdict was just definitive. These things were Persian.
Unmistakably.
So what were the specific chemical markers? What was the smoking gun? I mean, to my eye, a Chinese glaze and a Persian glaze, they both just look like glossy pottery.
The difference comes down to these ancient technological choices, specifically the choice of what's called a flux. Yeah. And the Persian glaze compositions were instantly recognizable. They had three key compositional anomalies compared to Chinese ware. First, significantly higher sodium oxide, Ne2O.
Okay.
Second, and this is the flip side, they had significantly lower aluminum oxide, Al2O3, and lower lime, CaO levels.
I get that those are chemicals, but what does that mean for a potter 1,000 years ago? Why would a Persian potter use more sodium and less aluminum than a Chinese potter?
It all comes down to local resources and tradition. The high sodium oxide is the key. Sodium oxide acts as a flux. It's a substance that drastically lowers the melting temperature of the glaze components.
So it makes it easier and cheaper to fire the pottery.
That's it, exactly. And Persian potters relied heavily on soda as this alkaline flux, which they could get from specialized plants that grow in arid environments. It's a hallmark of Middle Eastern and early Islamic glazing.
And the Chinese tradition relied on what instead?
Primarily on wood ash, which introduces higher levels of potassium and calcium into the mix, and that results in those lower sodium levels we see. So, high NEC2O is a clear marker for the Middle Eastern technique.
What about the low aluminum and lime then?
That points directly to the purity of the raw materials they were using. Low aluminum oxide and low lime suggest the Persian potters had access to, or just preferred to use, higher purity silica sand.
I see.
If your sand is contaminated with clay, which has aluminum, or limestone, which has calcium, those levels would be higher. So the combination soda flux and high purity silica, it's the unmistakable chemical signature of Persian ceramics of that period.
That is just incredible, that the raw materials used thousands of miles away left an indelible chemical barcode on these two tiny pieces that survived the Gobi.
Yeah, these fragments absolutely travel thousands of miles.
And if we acknowledge that kind of distance, we have to revisit the whole traditional idea of the Silk Road.
We do.
We established that glazeware was seen as this high-value tribute, a diplomatic gift for the Mongol elite.
Or evidence that big cities like Karakoram were the strict gatekeepers, the only distribution hubs for these luxury goods.
And that framework is still useful, of course, for many large-scale finds.
Sure, but this discovery is fundamentally disruptive. It places Persian goods directly into the hands of non-elite people in these temporary, non-administrative camps.
Right. If these expensive, far-traveled objects were only for the Great Khan, they wouldn't be found scattered across herding sites 8 kilometers apart.
They wouldn't. So this suggests there was a broader, more decentralized trade system.
We have to kind of remap the Silk Road, not just as these major arteries connecting capitals, but as this huge network of capillaries reaching the peripheral communities.
That's a great way to put it. We have to think about how these goods filtered out. This points toward nomadic trade systems, things like occasional trade fairs, seasonal markets.
Maybe large periodic gatherings where different groups would meet.
Exactly. And you have to wonder, what would a nomadic herder, who doesn't deal in currency like we do, trade for something so exotic and high-tech?
Their wealth was mobile, right?
Right. They would trade livestock, horses especially, which the Mongol Empire famously used to conquer half the world, or maybe high-value animal products, hides, furs, felt.
So you can imagine an indirect trade chain. The Persian ceramics go to Karakoram, they get traded for horses, and then that pottery gets traded again, maybe several times, until it hits a local market.
Where a herder can exchange a single prized goat for a small, exotic piece of tableware. It's a local barter economy plugged into a global supply chain.
That just massively expands the historical map. Globalization wasn't just top-down, it was filtering into the daily lives of mobile people.
And this pattern isn't unique to pottery, is it?
No, it isn't. Dr. Fromm specifically draws a parallel to other exotic status indicators found in similar non-elite Gobi sites.
Most notably, carnelian beads.
Right. Carnelian is that distinctive red-orange quartz, and those beads, just like the turquoise sherds, are non-local prestige items.
And their origin has been a huge research focus. They stood out because of their color and material. They were clear status indicators, even among mobile populations.
So the message is clear. The herders wanted status in exotic goods, and they had the means through these nomadic trade networks to get them.
Yes, but here's where we have to introduce that critical element of archaeological skepticism, which Dr. Fromm is really careful to raise.
Okay.
We're basing this whole profound historical conclusion on 2 sherds out of more than 9,000 found so far.
So could this just be a statistically insignificant fluke?
It's a fair question.
So what does this all mean? We have this strong chemical evidence, but could we just be getting misled by preservation or sampling bias?
This raises a really important multi-layered question about the historical record. We have to consider the scale and the environment. First, there's sampling bias.
Right. The survey area is huge.
It's 7,000 square kilometers. You can't do comprehensive, statistically random test pits across that entire area. It's just not logistically possible. So our perception of what's rare is limited by where we could actually look.
And then there's the Gobi environment itself.
Yeah.
It must just destroy evidence over time.
That's preservation bias. And it's maybe the most insidious part of this. The Gobi is relentlessly harsh. You've got centuries of intense weathering, freeze-thaw cycles, wind erosion, constant abrasion. Dr. Fromm suggests that many other glazed sherds might have existed, but the fragile telltale glaze itself could have been worn off completely.
So if the glaze disappears, the imported sherd would just look like local plain Gobi pottery.
It becomes an invisible import. Precisely. We might have missed hundreds of chemically exotic imported fragments that now just look like common, unglazed local ceramics.
So the only ones that survived and stood out were the few pieces whose glaze was tough enough to last.
Or they were just lucky in where they landed. But you also mentioned another form of bias, collection bias.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The human element.
This is where human nature meets archaeology. Archaeologists are, naturally drawn to and are trained to collect the objects that are distinctive.
Of course.
When you're walking across a vast, dusty landscape, a bright, shiny, turquoise-colored fragment just jumps out at you. It gets collected. It stands out against the dull grays and browns of the local stuff.
Meaning that a far-traveled sherd that was chemically Persian but maybe fired in just a simple brown or white glaze?
It might have been mistaken for something local and just overlooked.
Right.
A far-traveled but, very plain and ordinary sherd might go completely unnoticed because it doesn't scream, "I traveled thousands of miles."
And that skews our perception. We see the 2 Persian sherds and the carnelian beads because they're visually stunning. The truly common, everyday imports might be totally invisible to us now.
Exactly.
That is just a perfect synthesis of this deep dive. The chemical analysis of 2 tiny sherds in a remote corner of Mongolia has confirmed these direct Persian trade links.
Links that extend far beyond the traditional Silk Road centers.
Reaching non-elite nomadic Gobi communities. It forces us to just vastly expand our map of ancient commerce and consider the true global reach of the medieval economy.
And the broader significance, and this is drawing directly from Dr. Fromm's final thoughts, is that this study is really a roadmap for future research.
It's a call to action.
It is. Knowing this phenomenon exists means researchers not only have to keep searching for these distinctive glazeware sherds, but they also have to be vigilant for much less obvious indicators of these far-flung connections.
So we need to be chemically testing the boring-looking stuff too.
The seemingly plain, local-looking ceramics to see if they, too, are harboring an exotic signature.
So we've established that these high-value status items, like glazed pottery and carnelian beads, were traded across these massive distances. But think about this. If herders had the economic means and the trade routes to acquire ceramics and jewelry, what commonplace, less visible items might also have been traveling?
Right. Things like agricultural seeds or specialized textiles.
Medicinal herbs, or even specific dyes for their felt. Things that would facilitate the daily lives of these mobile populations. How many other hidden global connections might still be buried or just overlooked in the archaeological record simply because they weren't bright blue?
It's a great question.
That's something for you to mull on as you look at the mundane objects all around you.